Okay, welcome back, everyone. I hope you're all enjoying your third day of the Bonn Sustainable AI conference, and happy to see you all here for our final keynote of the conference. No pressure, but I know it's going to be amazing. So Shannon Vallor is giving us our final keynote of the conference, and the title of this keynote is Bootstrapping Sustainable AI: How to Reclaim Technology for Humane Futures. Brief bio on Professor Dr. Shannon Vallor. She is the Baillie Gifford Chair in the Ethics of Data and Artificial Intelligence at the University of Edinburgh's Futures Institute, where she directs the Center for Technomoral Futures. Her research explores the ethical impact of artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies on human character. She's a fellow of the Alan Turing Institute and advises government and industry on ethical use and design of AI. She is author of the book Technology and the Virtues, A Philosophical Guide to a Future Worth Wanting, and the forthcoming Lessons from the AI Mirror, Rebuilding Our Humanity in an Age of Machine Thinking. So Shannon has a very special place in my heart. That, you know, when you are a young academic and you're doing your PhD and you have these like rock stars in academia that you look up to. Well, this is Shannon for me. That I met her during my PhD and was just like, oh my God. So it's really exciting that we've maintained a friendship and also an academic collaborative relationship. So also, let's do some fun facts about Shannon Vallor. So I know she loves cocktails. Loves cocktails. The drier, the better, if I remember correctly. She also likes vinyl, if my sources were correct. Loves science fiction novels. And she had a really interesting tweet. She's like super famous on Twitter too, but had a really interesting tweet that I think it was maybe about a year ago, where she was talking about how she used to be such a tech nerd. Was like so excited about technology coming out, and that now, because of her role as an AI ethicist and being critical of technology, she was saying in this tweet that it like sucks that this enthusiasm, this optimism is gone because her job is about critiquing technology. So I think it's really interesting when people can also be honest in that way about how sometimes they have to shed the nerd shell at certain moments. Anyway, okay, so without further ado, I invite Shannon Vallor to the stage for our final keynote.
Thank you, Aimee, for that marvelous introduction. And I do remember our first meeting years and years ago at the University of Twente, and it was indeed the start of a beautiful friendship. I am also grateful to everyone here, both those who have shown up on the last day for the last talk. That is really remarkable. That is true sacrifice. So thank you for coming to listen. I hope I will honor your sacrifice. I also just have learned so much over the past few days, and I think you'll probably hear echoes of that in some of the things that I have to share with you. And in some cases, it's also a matter of kind of convergent thinking, that so many of us are seeing the same things and meditating on the same challenges. So I am looking forward to the conversation afterwards, where hopefully we can think about some of these things together. I'm going to start a timer just to try to be disciplined and not use all my time. I have a lot to say, but you do too, and I want to hear what that is. So let's get started. Okay, so this talk is called Bootstrapping Sustainable AI. If the reference to any of you is unclear, I'll explain it in just a few minutes. But before I get into explaining the title, I want to just sort of set the stage with respect to where we are today, right? And it's clear to everyone in this room that these are not normal times insofar as any of us have ever experienced normal times, right? It feels like a lot of things are coming unglued, speeding up, becoming more chaotic and fragile. And that's a very difficult time to be a philosopher, right? Philosophers are used to thinking over very long time horizons and thinking about things that are eternal and unchanging, and that's not the environment that we're in. So I wrote this talk, which is really based on a chapter of my book that's forthcoming, And those of you who've been hearing that for 5 years, it really is. I signed the contract and it's due next month, so it's really going to happen. The chapter that this was based on is really thinking about that fact that kind of the traditional modes of doing philosophy and reasoning aren't necessarily helping us here. And particularly the way I do philosophy. Right, my first book was about technology and the virtues, about the need for us to cultivate virtue as a way of addressing these uncertainties and fragilities in the world and the tech ecosystem. And this talk is going to problematize that, but hopefully in a way that still allows us to think about moving forward. So my argument today will be that when we think about the mounting problems of the world and our need for better responses to them, it's just not enough to simply ask for ethical AI, value-aligned AI, responsible AI, AI for good, or even sustainable AI. And not for the obvious reasons, right? We could talk about ethics washing and things like that all day. There's a deeper reason that I want to point to. And I think without critical reflection on the challenge that I'm going to highlight today, pursuing these goals from our present point of departure could be actively harmful. I think it's dangerous to respond to this moment of crisis by just demanding more virtue. Okay, let's talk about the bootstrapping challenge. So it refers to a saying in American English, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. How many of you here are familiar with that saying? Oh, good number, okay. So bootstraps, right? I mean, I think I actually have bootstraps here. They're kind of hard to see, but they're these little things you tug on at the back of your boot. The saying has an ironic dimension because it seems to command something physically impossible, right? If I'm standing here and I want to rise up somehow, get above the level I'm standing on, pulling on my bootstraps will not work. The saying refers to the difficulty of escaping a condition by relying entirely on your own resources. So for example, a person in poverty, particularly in the United States, can't simply escape that condition by hard work. Because if they lack the material resources to own a car, which in much of the United States is necessary in order to have a job, or work clothes, or a mobile phone, or without the social capital, such as interpersonal networks that reach beyond their economic class, if they lack all of these resources, which are precisely the conditions for many of poverty, then they lack the resources to escape that condition. They can't pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, despite the fact that that's what a certain segment of our political class repeatedly tells them to do. Or in the intellectual domain, right? And this is actually one of the earlier uses of this term. How can we truly understand the limits of the human mind by only activating the resources of that limited mind? How can a limited mind discover its own limits or understand what's beyond those limits, right? Okay, so hopefully the saying makes sense. Well, what does that have to do with sustainable AI or virtue? I'm suggesting that we face a bootstrapping challenge in the ethical dimension that's particularly tied to the sustainability crisis that we're in. What we routinely and unthinkingly take to be profiles of goodness and excellence, which is what virtue is about, are naturally going to be reflective of the same patterns of valuation and habits of action that got us where we are today. I'm suggesting that our dominant models of excellence, those that we most widely promulgate in academia, industry, and other settings of power, are now deficient and maladapted to the human family's future flourishing. In a way, they are like vestigial organs, right? The moral and epistemic equivalents of the appendix or the wisdom tooth, something that we have inherited as part of our historical legacy and that once had a purpose, but now actually just get in the way. And what I'm arguing in this talk is that I don't think we can pull ourselves up by these bootstraps. Okay, so what has conditioned the values and the models of excellence that we have inherited? What has conditioned our current models of social leadership? In the West, certainly one force has driven a particular constellation of values into a prominent and a dominant global position over the past few centuries, and that's the virtues of the modern industrial order, of modern industrial technoscience that culminate in AI. Okay, and these are the virtues that I'm going to point to as somewhat problematic. So this talk isn't really focused on the bad actors. This talk isn't focused on the people who are maliciously trying to pursue their own gain at the expense of the rest of us, right? This is a talk about the limitations that we face, even when we're thinking of the best examples of leadership that we have in these powerful systems of technoscientific innovation. There's another metaphor I think I could draw upon here. Trying to escape the sustainability crisis by pursuing more goodness or more virtue, guided only by the forms of goodness that we most easily recognize and valorize today, is like trying to get out of a hole by continuing to dig. How do we direct our moral sights to the forms of goodness that we actually need for a sustainable future and for the ethical development and use of technologies like AI, when our present virtues are precisely what have trained our moral sight? This is the bootstrapping challenge, and to meet it is going to require an unprecedented collective exercise of practical wisdom. By the way, in case any of you are curious about the image, it's a golden shovel, and it's actually taken by somebody who was trying to recreate the golden shovel from the Twin Peaks reboot. So I thought that was a really nice touch for the Twin Peaks nerds in the audience. But the idea is, right, the shovel's beautiful, right? The virtues that we celebrate have gotten us far, perhaps, and perhaps there's much to celebrate in them. But if they are, in fact, maladapted to our current moment, to our current needs, to the need to change course, then using them to move forward is like digging your way out of a hole with a golden shovel. Okay, so a few other thoughts. Today's social and moral and political and environmental problems demand an unprecedented alignment of moral and technical competence, if not excellence. And that's why I founded the Center for Technomoral Futures, to talk about the need for these forms of excellence to be reintegrated. And it's something that's now a commonplace. Like, we used to have to, John Sullins and Aimee and I remember when we used to have to try to sell this idea that excellence in the design and development of technical systems requires ethics, that you can't ignore the ethical dimension in technology. We no longer really have to make that argument very often, but that doesn't mean that the problems have been solved. And particularly, it's a fact that technologists today are facing a rising chorus of public distrust of both technical and scientific expertise, along with reactive fears and resentments of technology itself. And that is a danger insofar as we can, in fact, and need to, in fact, rely upon science and technology in order to continue to sustain human civilization and well-being. There is no way that 8 billion people on this planet are going to continue to flourish by somehow going back to the kind of pastoral era of local subsistence farming and simply living from the patch of land upon which you raise your children. We just can't do it that way. So we're going to need science and technology to help us build the next phase of the built world. But today, the power to design our futures, to disrupt and transform our institutions, and to steer the daily behaviors of billions is held almost entirely among a distributed multitude of software engineers and their employers and managers. And that terrifies many of us in this room, right? In our current environment, I actually think we have to recognize what this means is that these technologists and AI professionals are arguably being set up by our own expectations for moral and social failure. Consider the demand that people like me routinely make for responsible AI development and governance. That's something I will continue to demand. Well, responsibility is actually a pretty conservative demand. It doesn't ask for heroic measures. Responsibility is basically the moral floor. A teenager gets asked to be responsible, right? And we don't expect very much of teenagers. To remake the built world on the basis of a new constellation of values and virtues under tremendous environmental and resource pressures, and to do that with a society that's as fractured as ours, and yet to need society to broadly endorse this remaking of the built world, I think you'd need something a lot more than responsibility. You'd need wisdom, uncommon virtue. So I think to ask machine learning developers and engineers to lead and deliver that transformation, that deliverance into a sustainable future, by simply asking them to be more responsible is kind of silly if you think about it. Okay, I'm going to transition to some discussions of the kind of sustainable AI dimension of this, just to sort of illustrate the point, all right? Now, let's start with the AI for good label, right? And a lot of the kind of sustainable AI initiatives get folded into that. And I want to recognize here the distinction that Aimee has made and that others have made here this week about AI that is sustainable and AI for sustainability, right? And I'm mostly going to talk about the latter because I think the former is kind of built into what I'm asking for. It's really more the latter that concerns me. Okay. But let's just ask how good AI for good is. So what does it tend to want to do? I'm going to pick on Microsoft here because they had the most kind of visible website around AI for good and descriptions of all the projects that they were funding, okay? Well, if you look at what those projects are doing, I mean, the ethos seems to be very clear. Surveil everything, right? Flu prevalence, wildlife-human conflicts, environmental and biological soundscapes, fish movements, land cover. Just gather all the data, monitor and surveil and analyze everything. How sustainable is this? How sustainable is sustainable AI, right? Again, not just surveil, but analyze and predict everything. Predict marine heat waves, predict domestic whale failures, predict climate-related migration, toxic algal blooms, teen mental health crises. Compute everything, right? We now have a planetary computer initiative, a multi-petabyte catalog of global environmental data with intuitive APIs and applications. And by the way, projects must be developed and scaled with Microsoft Azure. Of course. All right, okay. Now, look, I don't want to be dismissive. Plenty of these things are incontestably good, right? We do need to find new energy efficiencies. We do need to map coastal erosion and flooding, predict crop failures, monitor supply chains, and AI can, in many cases, help with all of those needs. So I'm not saying, look, AI for sustainability is just some way to sell more Microsoft Azure credits, right? I'm saying that there are sort of real scientific and moral needs that these initiatives can meet. But I still worry, right? Because AI for sustainability of this sort is a very tightly constrained action space. The projects have to gather or access lots and lots of data. And we talked this week about what that entails from an environmental perspective, right? Not to mention a human rights perspective. Uses tons and tons of compute and requires investment in all kinds of infrastructure for surveillance tech that, by the way, can always be used to surveil things other than fish. And these initiatives push low-tech or alternative tech options out of view for funding, right? Those get pushed to the margins. It also often, not always, but often favors distanced, passive, and low-risk action, which is a double-edged sword. Sometimes you want to be distanced, right? Sometimes you want sort of low-risk initiatives. But this emphasis on observing, analyzing, categorizing, measuring, and mitigating harms that we already know exist and we know are already critical, right? I wonder sometimes what good that does us besides being a kind of delaying tactic, right? To gather more and more data on the thing that we already know we need to either stop doing or start doing, versus protesting, obstructing, redirecting, or restructuring unsustainable forces in society, right? AI for sustainability doesn't help us with any of that. It also risks entrenching techno-solutionism, right? This reliance on technical fixes and morally defanged views of innovation. So I found it's really interesting, this Microsoft AI for Earth grantee in their statement, their pitch defined innovation as a process, tool, approach, and/or a digital solution that has a functional prototype or proof of concept ready to be piloted. We use the words solution and innovation interchangeably. That's remarkably honest and also remarkably disturbing, right? Because we know that many of the challenges that we're facing, these complex environmental and sort of chaotic and evolving and accelerating trends, as well as the sort of social and political and economic challenges that are undermining our attempts to live sustainably, many of these just don't have solutions, right? That doesn't mean we have no course of actions open to us. But if all we're looking for are solutions, and anything short of a solution is not innovation, then we are throwing a lot of potential constructive and remedial and preventative action out the door. So I worry that sustainable AI, much of it anyway, is built upon an unsustainable set of values. And I'm going to talk about those values in a minute. But what I want to ask is, how do we bootstrap sustainable AI values that do not reproduce the same constellation of values that fed the sustainability crisis? The virtues of the modern industrial technoscientific order. So let's come back to these, what I'm calling the vestigial virtues, right? And this is tongue-in-cheek. I'm not suggesting that these notions must be discarded, that we can no longer celebrate any of these traits. And this is the kind of newer phase of my work that's more exploratory. So let's just see how we go. First of all, I started thinking about the concept of excellence, right? Which virtue translates as arete in Greek, which we translate in English as excellence. So if we're talking about virtue, we're talking about the need to cultivate excellence, intellectual, moral, political excellence. But what outside of philosophy has excellence meant? What has excellence meant to the generation of leaders who now occupy the halls of power in government and business? Well, particularly if you were raised in the United States, you would have ingested your understanding of excellence from things like this, the motivational posters that were on the wall, right, of every office and every kind of Silicon Valley mini kitchen in the 90s, and for a while longer as well. Now, you probably can't read this, so I'm going to read it to you, what the description is at the bottom. Excellence is the result of caring more than others think is wise, risking more than others think is safe, dreaming more than others think is practical, and expecting more than others think is possible. I want you to dwell on that for a minute, right? Some of that sounds kind of good. We want people to care. We want people to dream. But I think the image tells you what really this is invoking. The solitary eagle who soars above the rest of us, and the man who moves fast and breaks things, right? The man who doesn't listen when other people say, I know you want this, but it isn't safe. Here's another one. And God help me, it has a fake Confucius quote. The will to win, the desire to succeed, the urge to reach your full potential, these are the keys that will unlock the door to personal excellence. And note what the fish is doing. The fish is leaving the rest of us behind in our tiny bowl. This is the billionaires who dream of escaping to the stars while the rest of us rot on a ruined earth. And notice that excellence here is described as the will to win, the will to defeat others. It's personal excellence, which here does not mean what Aristotle meant by personal excellence, the excellence of the citizen, the excellence of the leader, the excellence of someone who shapes the polis into something beautiful and strong. It's personal excellence in the sense of the individual who, again, leaves everybody else behind. All right, this is low-hanging fruit, right? No one ever took this particularly seriously as a moral instruction, so I think I need to get more serious than this. But I'm not saying this didn't have an effect, right? People took this crap very, very seriously in a way, you know? I mean, it was cheesy, but it was also ubiquitous, and it was ubiquitous for a reason. Okay, I want you to look at these. These are what we might call, you know, the Silicon Valley virtues, or more broadly speaking, you know, the virtues that are celebrated in the halls of innovation. They're what people are praised and lauded for in the tech world, and increasingly in industry more broadly. So we can talk about efficiency, productivity, speed, scale, impact, acceleration, amplification, disruption. And interestingly, these virtues are applied interchangeably and seamlessly to products and people. In truth, because in this world, the distinction is increasingly irrelevant. In Silicon Valley, they've picked up the phrase 10x as a shorthand for excellence. How many people have heard this phrase? Just a few? Okay. What is 10x? A 10x engineer is 10 times better at their job than their peers. They're the one that leaves the others in the dust with their inhuman speed, productivity, and impact. In truth, they're the person who stays up all night on amphetamines and doesn't give any time to their family or friends, right? These are the people who burn out. There's plenty of evidence that these people don't actually produce lasting value for companies. But in Silicon Valley culture right now, if you're on any kind of lists or community social media groups or Discord channels or things where tech people talk, they're constantly talking about the 10x engineer, and not just the 10x engineer, but the 10x everything. It's shorthand for what we want. Okay. These virtues of the Valley are not too different, however, because it's easy to beat up on Silicon Valley tech bro culture, right? Again, low-hanging fruit. But let's be honest with ourselves. These virtues are not too different from what we praise and reward in academia as the marks of research excellence, right? Those of us who are academics here are very familiar with being asked to demonstrate our impact, to demonstrate the scale, how many times we've been cited, how many papers we've put out this year, how fast we can get ourselves promoted. Okay, let's talk about some other virtues. Perseverance. All right, well, that sounds good. Perseverance seems like something we need, right? I'm not actually sure that this is the virtue that we want to celebrate. I think perseverance is why Elon Musk will not stop ruining Twitter, why Mark Zuckerberg could never change course or step away from Facebook and let someone wiser lead. But it's also why many of us who are wiser than these leaders are habituated ourselves to always keep going, even if we're failing, right? What do we tell people? The solution is to failure. Try harder, right? That's what the excellent person does. They just keep trying. Again, I don't want to discount the value in certain contexts of encouraging and fostering perseverance. But think about the kind of constellation of values and the kind of world that gets created where people don't know how to stop. They don't know how to admit failure. They don't know how to change course. This gives us no opening to the abolition of unsustainable patterns. and ways of life. As Cesar reminded us in his opening keynote, right? Abolition simply means stop doing the thing you have always done. And so long as perseverance is one of the sort of cardinal virtues of our ecosystem, of our moral, political, and technical ecosystem, I don't think we will be able to stop doing what we have always done. Think about positivity, right? This is also something that both in academia and in tech and in business gets you rewarded. And its opposite gets you marginalized, right? Optimism is what everybody in power wants. But what do the virtues of perseverance and positivity mandate in the context of the sustainability crisis? And how do they affect, for example, our treatment of the very kinds of social movements that manifest resistance to these currently unsustainable ways of life? Right? When we see young people in the streets violating curfews to protest racial injustice and authoritarian regimes, or boycotting their classes to loudly demand climate action to preserve their futures, how do we judge them? Are they seen as virtuous? Are they seen as practically wise? Some of you in this room may judge them that way. But look at how they're described in mainstream media, right? Look at how they're described by political leaders. Look at how they're described by just many people, in your families that you've heard complain about young people who just don't know how to be constructive. They don't know how to be disciplined, right? They're breaking things, they're damaging things, they're poisoning things. And they're so negative, right? Constantly complaining. What do the virtues of positivity mandate in the context of the sustainability crisis, other than asking young people to walk happily and contentedly into their graves? Or worse, to dig the graves of future generations? Resilience. Again, that's a good one. I knew that was going to happen. Damn it. Okay. I saw this artifact in the deck after I'd already loaded it up, so too late. Resilience is the ability to absorb an impact or shock, to bounce back from an external force without breaking apart, to keep working and functioning in one's social role even after a trauma. Okay, why is this virtue now at the center of our policies for well-being, social health, and climate action? Governments love to talk about resilience. Tech folks love to talk about resilience. What are the limits of resilience, and what does resilience as a virtue license, right? It licenses those shocks. It licenses those external forces. It responsibilizes society and individuals and the most marginalized and vulnerable among us, both as individuals and institutions and countries, to keep working and functioning even as these forces assault them. But isn't resilience what we all should aspire to? I'm not so sure. Finally, adaptability. Again, tons of talk in government about adaptation and the ability of AI to help us be resilient and adaptable to climate change. Okay, so far as it goes, but look, adaptability is the virtue of being willing to change yourself in the face of external change, to remake yourself to fit new situations or contexts. But what does this virtue take as a given? What expectation does it or these other virtues apply to us when built into the value frame for sustainable AI and related policy, right? Again, it responsibilizes us to accommodate ourselves to an unsustainable and unsatisfactory world. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up now. I think the virtues of the tech and AI domain as applied to both products and people are the virtues of efficiency, seamlessness, speed, lossless transmission. They're the virtues of delivery. They are not the virtues of deliverance. And Jacques Ellul predicted this, right? Those of us who studied him know, right? He said that technique is a closed circle. He said that modern man's state of mind is completely dominated by technical values, and his goals are represented only by such progress and happiness as is to be achieved through techniques. The presumed opposition between ethical problematics and technological systematics probably at the present is, and certainly in the long run will be, false. He said this in 1962, and what he meant is that our moral values would be absorbed into and becoming distinguishable from our technical virtues. So my question to you is, what virtues can deliver us from the closed circle of values of the technological order which define and trap us in an unsustainable present? How do we bootstrap our way into these virtues, since virtues only arise through shared social practices? But I am going to leave you just briefly with some constructive suggestions for that. And just as a sort of defense mechanism, they're going to sound unrealistic, they're going to sound idealistic, but try to remember that in a leaky lifeboat with a violent storm approaching, which is our current state of affairs, no proposal of the passengers is idealistic or naive if it's the only plausible way to bring the boat to shore. If someone has a better one, I'm all for it. So let's talk about the virtues of deliverance, right? The virtues of care, repair, restoration, respect, restraint, discernment, justice, solidarity, hospitality, making a home for others in the world, keeping a home, humility, love, and moral ambition, right? Remember what I said about not being able to move forward by kind of returning to the sort of pastoral traditions of the ancients, right? We need the moral ambition to build things that have never been seen before. But we can't bootstrap these new virtues by an act of will. We have to find the practices that will shape them. This came up in the Q&A after John Sullivan's talk today, where we were talking about the fact that there are value systems outside the West, right, that don't fall into these patterns. But we can't simply steal those and crown ourselves with them, right? It doesn't work that way. That's not how virtue develops. Virtue develops through shared social practices, and we don't have them. So we have to make them. Where are the practices we need? My final thought will just be to give a very sharp rebuke of, I think, where many of our value systems arose through the kind of Greek philosophical tradition that starts with Plato, who denies the practitioners of the mechanical arts citizenship, right? No citizen, nor any of his servants should enter the ranks of the workers whose vocation lies in the arts or crafts. And Aristotle doubled down, right? He says, our definition of the excellence of a citizen will not apply to every citizen, but only to those who are freed from necessary services. And this excludes, as he says at the top, the artisan class. The necessary people are either slaves who minister to the wants of individuals or mechanics and laborers who are the servants of the community. God forbid we be servants of the community, right? To be a servant of the community is to be beneath the status of the citizen for Aristotle. Now, I have a whole story about why that is, right? And it won't surprise you, it has to do with gender, and it has to do with the role of technology as emerging within the domestic sphere as a way of meeting other people's needs. But there are some little hopeful signs through history, right? There was a medieval reclamation, temporary, but still, and revalorization of technical virtue that was modeled on this idea of technology as service. It is they, John of Salisbury says, the craftsmen and artisans who raise, sustain, and move forward the weight of the entire body, meaning us, the community, observing constant reference to the public utility. What if this were still our dominant conception of what technologists do and are and aspire to? What if we saw them the way John of Salisbury saw them? What if they saw themselves the way John of Salisbury saw them, as the feet, not the head, the feet of the social body carrying it forward? And there was, following this, a medieval revalorization of technology as political service to the whole, a skilled profession of tending to the needs of the community. But then you see the modern alienation. I'm almost done. I know I'm over time. the modern alienation of the mechanical arts of the laboratory, right, a supposedly apolitical space for intellectual experimentation by noblemen, and that world gets separated off from the now devalued, disenfranchised, and largely feminized arts of domestic and public care, which we continue, right, to demean and undermine today. The consequence? Practitioners of techne, what Aristotle called the necessary people, are dually severed from political wisdom and responsibility. If they're in the rarefied sphere of the laboratory, then they are supposed to be apolitical and freed, liberated from the burden of political service. And if they're in the home, they're simply disempowered and cut off from the polis. And that's where we've been for a while, to be honest. But what new kind of world would follow if we were to revalorize what I will call the technomoral virtues of the necessary people? What could AI be as a tool if it were designed for the hands of the necessary people? What kinds of virtues could be cultivated in a tech culture that once again centered, valued, and empowered the necessary people? What kinds of worlds could we build and sustain if we could only revalorize the practices, the duties, and the virtues of the necessary people? I look forward to your answers. Thanks.
Oh, yeah? Hello. Yeah, I totally lost track of keeping time because I was just like, oh my God, yeah. So sorry, my bad.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. No, it was so inspiring and so good that
Sorry I
was
made you
just
bad
like,
at your job.
Thanks. Okay, so I open the floor to questions for people who are here in person and also for those of you who are joining us online. For the online participants, can you please use the Q&A function? Yes, first question.
Hi, thank you, Shannon. That was amazing, of course. So first, I just want to say that I love the alliteration of vestigial virtues, and I also think you could refer to them individually if you like anagrams like I do, especially given your imagery as a moral molar.
Nice.
Thank you. So, jokes aside, one of the things that's really nice about virtue ethics is that it's, when it's normative, it's basically just pluralism, right? And so this conference is about plurality. And so I really like the idea of kind of bringing what's useful about Western ethics, right, into these kinds of discussions in ways that aren't very imperialistic. And one of the ways I think that works with virtue ethics approaches is to say, these are the kinds of things we should think about kind of pinning down, right? Or like figuring out what the appropriate virtues are. And so the only kind of critique I would have is attempting to outline here and now what the virtues are that we should be going for. And I mean, I don't think that's a terrible thing to do at all, but it should be just like one voice, right, in the conversation. So that's what's great about, I think, this approach that you provide us with is then, what virtues should we be pursuing right now? And then it's a discussion, right? Like we've seen at this conference, and that's what we can have moving forward is not, should we be temperate? Should we be, things like that. But like, who should be deciding what we should be considering as candidate virtues in the first place, and to really open that up across borders, right? Conceptual, geographical, whatever, as much as possible. And so it's really like, it's not really a critique, right? But it's just like that I think we should just leave open right now, and we could leave it open, and that allows for all this like pluralism and plurality to come in and inform the discussion about what the appropriate virtues are.
Yeah, that's a great comment. I think it reintroduces the challenge that virtue ethics has already always faced, which is if virtues can't certify themselves, what's the higher standard? And if you're going to have a plurality of conceptions of virtue, what will be the principles by which those disputes will be negotiated, right? So I wrote about that a little bit in my first book, and one of the interesting points is that there are, of course, many virtues that you have a version of in virtually every virtue tradition, regardless of historical period and place, but the virtues will look very different in the practices that enculture them and cultivate them. So I think there's an interesting question of whether the plurality needs to be in the virtues so much, or the plurality needs to be in the different ways that we go about cultivating them and expressing them. So that's one point. I do think, though, that even with respect to the virtues, there is no sort of clean, tidy, universal list of them. And I think that's fine, but I think we could talk about something like this idea of the necessary people as something that cuts across sort of cultural boundaries, right? Every culture has the necessary people. You cannot have a human civilization without them. Why? Because we're very vulnerable and fragile beings that can't pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps, that can't heal our own wounds often, right? And that can't build everything we need for ourselves. And so we depend upon each other. And one of the thinkers who has thought most carefully about the clashes between different virtue traditions is the philosopher Alistair MacIntyre, right? And while I don't agree with everything he has ever said, and he's modified his own views on these matters, he has talked in his book, Rational Dependent Animals, about the common feature of humanity, our vulnerability and interdependence. And this is a rebuke of Aristotle from him, right? And I think there's a something there to keep hold of. The thing that we all share, no matter where we live on this planet, is an intense vulnerability to climate change. And the extent to which we're not equally vulnerable is largely artificial and constructed, right? And also temporary. Eventually, we will all be touched by this, even those of us who've been insulated by certain kinds of privilege, right? So I think this vulnerability is the shared thing, and the virtues of the necessary people are the things that respond to that vulnerability. And that might be the ground on which we agree, while allowing for different ways and different experiments, really, in addressing those vulnerabilities.
Thanks. I couldn't agree more. Can I just quickly ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
So do you think that it's not that there's not universal virtues per se, but that they're also not static? And so what the virtues are can shift,
Yes,
maybe
very
given
much.
who the necessary people are at different stages.
Yep.
Thanks.
In fact, that's the point of the vestigial virtues, that something can be a virtue and then it can be a vice in another context.
Great.
Thanks. My first comment is on your example of the energy efficiencies, and I would kind of push back against this, because these are the same kinds of efficiencies that have brought us to a point where the current socio-technical system is so efficient that we are unable to remove it, and we are unable to overcome it. So I think it's a double-edged sword, these energy efficiencies that are driven by AI, which can backfire, can result in rebound effects, etc. So I don't know if it's a good example. But my question is, how do you think we can deal with the trade-offs between the social and environmental values that we might need to foster going forward? Maybe for the first time in history, we face this trade-off between, as you said, 8 to 10 billion people on the planet, and wanting them to have good lives, but also not further exceeding planetary boundaries. What could be guiding or guardrails to navigate these challenges?
Sure. Let me respond to your first comment first. Of course, and there was a talk earlier this week that mentioned this, that energy efficiencies aren't a solution, in the sense that I mentioned. We don't, in many cases, have solutions. And one of the reasons that energy efficiencies aren't a solution is because if that's all you have, then people just use more. right? They just become more wasteful with the additional energy that you've delivered, right? However, I think it would be unrealistic to say that we can continue to carry 8 billion people on this planet without improving energy efficiencies in certain areas. Even just to meet the basic needs of a home, warmth, light, cooking, we need to be more efficient at doing those things, right? You just can't have that as the solution. You need these other approaches that will ensure, for example, that the excess capacity that is created by those efficiencies is not simply wasted by excess consumption. These are all sort of matters of practical wisdom, of virtue, right? Of using discerning judgment to do this. And the same is true when we talk about balancing different interests or balancing different value commitments, right? And you're certainly right that value conflicts do and will continue to arise in this context. Some of these conflicts, I think, are less stark than they might first appear. So, for example, a conflict between social and environmental virtues will be more stark in its appearance than it actually is if you are thinking of the social virtues as applying only to those alive today, right? Once you extend the social concern beyond that horizon, some of the tension between the social and environmental virtues lessens. It doesn't fully go away, though, right? Because it's not just humans living on this planet. And we aren't the only things with moral standing, right? And so we have to also think about, and this is where that virtue of hospitality comes in. This actually comes back in a beautiful way in the very origins of Indian philosophy, which long predate Greek philosophy, where one of the kind of core virtues is described as the ability to be a home for others, and that includes non-humans. That to be a home, to make a home, is part of what enlightenment entails, right? And so we need to be able to think about the environmental virtues as the things that allow us to be hospitable, not only to ourselves and not only to future human generations, but to the fragile life that has evolved on this planet and have their own claims to flourishing. So those tensions are there, and practical wisdom is precisely the thing that allows you to make discerning judgments in contexts where there's no clear rule about what should have priority. Yeah.
Thank you very much. This was really an inspiring talk. My question is, I think we are living in times which requires also rethinking of the social contract between state and society. I wonder what you think about how is there a way to link virtue ethics with that of social contract theory?
That is a super interesting question, and I have thought about that a lot. Not gotten very far yet. And I think I need someone else to help me with this. So anyone who wants to...
I am from the IWE, so you know.
Excellent. So
here at Bonn.
Yes.
Would love to work with you.
Yes, would love the volunteer. Thank you so much. I think social contract theory is something I end up invoking in different contexts where but I end up turning off the virtue language in order to talk about the social contract language. For reasons that will be quite obvious, because social contract theory can be interpreted as belonging to this kind of liberal framework of competing interests that doesn't fit very well with the virtue framework. And yet I think there's an element of the social contract that's very powerful, right? For example, when we talk about the social license to operate of certain kinds of businesses, and of course, you know, this arose in the context of mining operations where communities refused certain kinds of destructive mining companies the permission, even though those companies were operating legally. They used their own activism to refuse those companies permission, the social license to operate in those spaces, and demanded a social contract of those private companies with the community that would need to be observed in order for that license to be extended again. And I think there are many contexts in which thinking about social contracts makes sense. So I'm intrigued by that suggestion. I've not yet found a clear way to reconcile these frames, but I think there might be something there to work on.
Yep. Thank you. So I'm going to choose just one of the questions from the online participants. This is anonymous participant. A great keynote. Thank you very much. Would you call the software engineers from the beginning of your keynote necessary people? Isn't it the late revenge of the techne that the technicians now inscribe their values in technology so that the philosophers of the Vita Activa can see who really rules the world? Bracket, sorry for the long question. I'm just so excited about the talk.
I love that question. Are the software developers I spoke of at the beginning of the talk the necessary people? I suppose my answer is in many cases, yes, we've made them the necessary people, but we've done so without allowing them to cultivate the virtues of the necessary people, right? So they're the necessary people in the sense that we can't meet our needs without them, right? I can't get a doctor's appointment anymore, right, without relying on software engineers who build the app or the web interface that allows me to communicate with my GP, or the phone tree that I access when I call in, right? And that's true for many of us. Whether they want to be or not, they're now in the position of the necessary people. And yet they have only some of the virtues, right? They have those kind of virtues, perhaps of ingenuity and of a certain kind of what Aristotle would call cleverness, right? The kind of problem-solving ability that can be detached from sort of moral or political excellence. But they're missing the other virtues of the necessary people, what I called the virtues of deliverance, that are rooted in this mission, right? This mission that the early medieval thinkers I pointed to really understood. They were trying to claim, so there's this really interesting article, Mechanics and Citizens, that talks about Aristotle's exclusion of the mechanics from the political body, and the way that certain medieval thinkers who were otherwise, as the philosophers in the room know, right, committed to upholding the Aristotelian philosophical model, how many of them sort of twisted themselves in knots to try to interpret Aristotle as not excluding the mechanics, and as redescribing the mechanics as having a political place. And they largely did it through this notion of service and care, which was always integral to Aristotle's politics, right? And they pointed out that the polis cannot be sustained simply by intellectual service, that it must be sustained by mechanical service, and that this is no less valuable. And so I think there's something to return to there in a new way, in a new vein.
Thanks so much for the answer. Yeah, Tom?
Thanks so much. Thank you for the great keynote. I have a question about the relationship between your framing of the necessary people and as that concept relates to the necessary workers, and specifically what happened to them during the pandemic and right after, and how you relate these events that we all were able to observe during and after the pandemic to your theoretical take. Thank you.
Thank you for that question, because it cues me to return to something that I sped through at the end because I was way over my allotted time, I suspect. And that is that what we have done in society is utterly devalue the broad swath of necessary people who do not work with digital tools or are not empowered to design and deploy them. So I'm talking about the nurses, the teachers, right? The janitors, the content moderators, right? The gig workers. I could go on and on and on, right? And what's really interesting, and I know this is different from culture to culture and country to country, but in many places I know, right, you might, as let's say a plumber in the United States, actually earn a tremendous salary. You can earn more money as a plumber than I earn. It's not even hard, But in American society, if you're a plumber, you're at the bottom of the social hierarchy in terms of the valorization of what you do, right? Why? For the same reason that Aristotle excluded the mechanics, because all you do is meet the needs of others. All you do is serve as the feet on which homes and businesses walk. And the fact that we don't dignify and elevate and celebrate people who do that, I think, is the biggest part of why we are where we are. Because one of the things that necessary people do in this context, that is people whose professional and personal lives are devoted to the service of others, what people like that do is, I think, they tend to notice when a way of being or a way of acting is becoming unsustainable. Necessary people are very sensitive to resources, right? They tend not to be wasteful. If your job is to take care of other people, you're very cautious in how you use the resources that you need in order to do that. And so I do think that there is something, I'm not suggesting this is a magic bullet, it's going to be the only solution to these problems, but I do think that just sort of calling for certain values, whether it's responsibility or justice, and not talking about what are the practices that are going to cultivate those values or their expression in virtues, what are the practices that are actually going to build that in us? We aren't having that conversation. And right now, the people who do, in fact, devote their lives to those practices are the most underpaid and socially devalued humans in many of our societies. And that is, I think, a poison at the root of our modern world that we barely notice. And largely because the people who do that work are often, not always, of course, right, but in many cases, they're often women, or they're immigrants, or they're people who have in some way been already marginalized by society. If the necessary people were paid and socially esteemed the way that software engineers were, the world we are in would look very, very different.
Yes. So please join me in thanking Shannon Vallor once again for her captivating keynote.
Thank you.
So also, sorry to the people asking questions online. For timing reasons, I have to close the conference.
It's my fault because I went over.
No, it's my fault. I wasn't paying attention. I was just so captivated.